Okay, well, good evening everybody, and welcome to what's going to be my last webinar for a little while. I've got a lot of information tonight that I think will be very helpful to those who own property or are looking to own property. There's a lot of misinformation around at the moment. There's a lot of confusion with respect to what's happening on the global scene. And so tonight I hope to be able to shed some light and give you some information that I think will help you make informed decisions as you move forward. That's a picture of my family, and I'm just showing you because I can. I have a beautiful wife and 4 children, 1 son and 3 daughters. And I don't know about your family, but my daughters are all loud and sanguine and out there, and my son's a lot quieter, but I love them all. Just like to draw your, it always does that, it goes too fast. Draw your attention, if I may please, to the disclaimer. I hold a Diploma of Financial Services, and on a one-on-one basis can offer you financial advice of a generic nature, but I can't do that in a public forum, nor would I. It's not right, because everyone's situation is uniquely different. So tonight what I'll be doing is sharing ideas, experiences, thoughts, concepts, ideas and opinions, but I ask that you don't take anything tonight as direct financial advice. At the end of the presentation I'm going to point you to 2 forms, and in fact the links will be in the side panel, and you'll be able to click there and bring them up in your browser directly. But the first one will be an event feedback form, and there's 2 purposes of that form. One is, as the name implies, just to get some feedback as to how you felt the event went. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, to tell us how you would like us to treat you moving forward. I find that in a presentation like this, there are, broadly speaking, 3 groups of people: those that are ready to take the next step, whatever that may be, but they would like to talk to us to discuss options and possibilities. Then there are those who simply have questions and want to further their information, education, and just engage. And then there are those who timing isn't right, or they're not in a position or not interested in doing anything at this stage. And if we know how you would like us to treat you, then we can do so accordingly. The second form will point you to what we call a My Starting Point assessment form. And that simply enables us to get a snapshot of where you're currently positioned so that we can help you make responsible decisions moving forward. Sometimes banks will lend us money, but we shouldn't. So it's really important just to get a snapshot of where you are, and then by understanding what your goals and objectives are, we can sit down with you and strategize a path forward. All right. I'm a great believer that successful people are people who know what they want, they find out how to get there, and then they put those efforts into a vehicle that has the capacity to take them there. I sometimes use the analogy of a motor car. Your teenager might, ride a skateboard down the street, but you need a car to get around the city, and perhaps a 4-wheel drive to get across the desert, and you need an aeroplane to get across the Tasman or wherever. So different vehicles will achieve different things, and so what you want to achieve with your life, the goals and aspirations you have, will determine the vehicle and the way that vehicle is driven that's right for you. The biggest mistake, or I suppose a sad mistake, that I see people make only all too regularly is people start out with a dream or a goal or a desire or an ambition to achieve something, end up in a job, and then requalify, even if it's subliminally. They redefine what it is they want out of life through the prism of what it is that they're now doing. So the person who's a factory worker views life through what's possibly achievable for someone in my position. The person who's a school teacher, a brain surgeon, an architect, a nurse, or whatever the occupation may be, can look through the prism of what they do and what people in their industry earn and what people who have been doing what they've been doing but maybe for 5 or 10 years longer could perhaps achieve over the next 5 or 10 years. But that's actually a lie. It doesn't matter who you are, what your education is or what you've done. What matters are the dreams and the goals and the aspirations you have and what you're prepared to do about them. Now tonight I'm going to be sharing knowledge, and the vehicle that I'll talk about is residential property. What I can't give you is a reason why you would do this. So in that formula that I've got there of success, there are 3 very, very important ingredients, but the hardest one to get a hold of and to stay focused on is that first one, but I encourage you to do so. The system that we promote, practice, talk about and encourage others to utilize is one that we call set and forget for busy people. And as the name implies, the MRD system is really catered or really geared for those people who lead full lives, who you know what you want to achieve, but you're so busy with everything that you're doing, you don't necessarily have the chance or the opportunity to oh, my wife's online. I knew I shouldn't have opened Google Talk. You don't have the chance or the opportunity to do the things that you really want to do. So set and forget is all about you getting on with life and doing what you do best, but having a plan that's working for you in the background, that's there for you in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, something that you can literally just forget about completely and know that the people who work with you, who sit next to you, who maybe ride the train with you, in that sense your lives are exactly the same, you're doing the same things, but you have a solution, whereas sadly, quite possibly all they'll have is hope that there's going to be a pension. Now to that end, in order for you to be able to set and forget, we take a very narrow strategy because most investment types or asset classes require a little bit of involvement and activity from you. If you were to invest in commercial property while the economy is going well, you probably could set and forget. But as you know, it's pretty easy to have long vacancies in a commercial property when things aren't travelling so well. So in that sense, I would classify it as a little bit more speculative and perhaps something that you would stress about at certain times. So from an investment point of view, you can make money doing a lot of things, and I acknowledge that. I know people who make money in all sorts of endeavours and activities, and that's fantastic, but we only talk about property, and we only talk about residential property, not commercial, rural, industrial, etc. Under that broad umbrella of residential property, we look for median priced, close to infrastructure services, rail, hospital, etc., as much as affordability will allow, because you pay a little bit more and you get perhaps there is a little bit of a trade-off. So once again, it comes down to an individual situation. We only look at permanently let, not holiday let, not student accommodation, service departments, etc. We don't look at renovating, trading, speculating, etc. It's a buy and hold strategy. So it's a very narrow strategy. It's a very conservative strategy. It's an incredibly safe strategy because it is the only asset class that's not dominated by investors. That's residential property. You think of it. Even residential property that's holiday let is dominated by investors. Residential property with students in it is dominated by investors. Service departments are dominated by investors. But residential housing is a market that is completely dominated by owner-occupiers, and therefore it mitigates so much risk. Why do anything at all? Well, in 1960, the average period of time that a person received a pension for was 6 years. Today at 65, the average Australian female lives for 22 years and men for 18.5. And let's face it, most people don't want to work till 65. They have goals and aspirations to retire a bit early. And therefore, people really need to consider how they're going to fund themselves for 30 years in retirement. Federal government at the moment spends a third of its budget on Centrelink payments. That's pensions, unemployment benefits and family payments. Let me ask you the rhetorical question. What plan have you got in place right now that's going to give you certainty and assurance to support you in retirement? Most people struggle if they don't get paid for a month, let alone 30 weeks, but 30 years. At that time in your life when chances are there will be more money needed for medical care and so on and so forth. It is so serious. If you don't do this, if it's not property, I implore you to do something. Please don't do what most people are going to do, and that's absolutely nothing. They get caught up in the rut. They go from home to work, work to home, 5 or 6 days a week. They have the best intentions often. They mean to do something often, but they just don't get around to it. They think they'll buy an old property and do it up, but it's a better idea than it is a practical one. Meanwhile, a year passes and 5 years passes and 10 years pass, and all people are is older. And the chance to create wealth and a future for themselves and their family, that window is closing. By 2050, there'll be 2.7 workers supporting every person over 65. Right now, there's 5. A quarter of our population will be 65 or more, which means it's only going to get more difficult to fund an aging population. People say it couldn't happen here. Yes, it could. We all know that. We just turn the television on. Austerity measures, riots in Greece. Now it's the Italians' turn. Since the GFC, France, Germany, Greece, Russia, Ireland and the United Kingdom have either raised the pension age or have intention in the process of planning on raising the pension age, as are Australia. They can't give you what they don't have. Right now, pensioners in Australia earn $689, not a week, a fortnight. And if you're a couple, $519 each, a fortnight, plus perhaps a small utilities allowance of about $50. It's not a lot of money. I ask that question again. If it's not this, what is it? We hear the term two-speed or patchwork economy. In Greece, we've got countries like Germany, Spain, Portugal, Italy. Basket cases, not doing well at all. Then you've got a country like Germany, which is being asked to bail them out, underwrite their debt. You've got this tug of war going on within the European community between, the strong countries and the weaker ones. And right now, the weaker ones are weighing them down, and Europe is suffering as a result. We, in Australia, we have a two-speed economy. We've got the resource sector, and then we've got the non-resource sector. The non-resource sector that's not travelling so well is probably more the retail, manufacturing and tourism industries. But the strength of our resource boomers, I'm going to show you some figures in a minute, but the strength of the resource sector is just so incredibly powerful that even the sectors that are struggling a little bit can't undo the strength of the Australian economy. If you look at it as a tug of war, the strong part of our economy is winning. On a global scale, the world is made up of, broadly speaking, a fast lane and a slow lane. And you've got the North Atlantic zone, being Europe, America and so forth, and they literally, it's where the old money is, but they're doing it really tough at the moment. And then you've got Asia. You've got China and India in particular, just booming economies. And of course, Australia is heavily tied to that part of the world today. The International Monetary Fund back in September warned of a possible global recession again, or another possible global recession. The funny thing was, the global recession of 2008 didn't come to Australia. We felt the effect of it, but we didn't actually go into recession. So when they talk about global recession, it doesn't mean wiping out everyone in its wake. In fact, the same IMF downgraded China's growth forecasts as a result of the slowdown that's happening in Europe and America, and will continue to happen if Europe goes into recession and takes America with it, which is highly likely. So China's growth forecasts were downgraded for this year to 9.5% from double-digit figures. Now, that might be considered a slowdown by China's standards, but by anyone else's standard, that is just phenomenal growth. And they've said next year, because of the ongoing challenges in in Europe, China will grow by only about 9%. Again, phenomenal figures. We are tied to that part of the world. We are in the fast lane. And not only is it the business that we're currently doing and the contracts we've currently got and the demand that's there, but we have a huge, massive pipeline of mining and energy development projects yet to come through the pipeline. There's a magazine called The Economist magazine. It's a US publication, and in May of this year they wrote an article on Australia, and among other things it said a typical Chinese apartment uses 6 tons of steel. Each ton of steel needs 107 tons of iron ore and half a ton of coking coal. Where do you think they get that from? It went on to say that the Australian economy, or Australia's economy, and with it inflation, interest rates and house prices, though not the share market, have decoupled or has decoupled from America's. Here's a snapshot of China's growth in the last 2 quarters. The last quarter they grew by 2.2% on the previous quarter, which was 2.1% on the previous quarter. They're doing incredibly well. So what if China and India were to slow? Well, official Chinese manufacturing figures released a couple of weeks ago, 1st of November, showed that they have actually slowed. But I don't see that as all bad news, because the 2-speed economy that we're experiencing here in this country has got a lot to do with the strength of China's demand on us. So by taking some of the pressure off commodities, or off the price of commodities, by, this is the way it'll go. Europe falls into recession more than likely, takes America with it. America and Europe combined place less demand on Chinese produced goods. Therefore, China doesn't need to make as much. Therefore, they don't need as much resources. Therefore, they don't buy as much from Australia. Therefore, the demand on our commodities drops somewhat, reducing the price of those commodities, which reduces inflation in the economy. When inflation is reduced in the economy, the Reserve Bank gets excited and reduces interest rates. When interest rates go down, so does the exchange rate, because less people are inclined to invest in the Australian dollar because the returns are less attractive. When the exchange rate goes down, tourism goes up. More people fly into Australia because it's cheaper. They can convert their dollars into more of our dollars. All of a sudden our manufacturing sector can sell more overseas because we're more cost competitive. Retailers stop complaining about people buying on the internet with the high Australian dollar. And so it levels out a little bit of the inconsistencies in the economy. Take a little bit of heat out of the resource sector and put a little bit of muscle back into the rest of the economy. And meanwhile, you and I, investors, get to enjoy lower interest rates. So any slowdown in China is likely to have minimal impact on their economy and very little impact on our economy. It depends on how big a recession it was, etc., etc. But the demand within China themselves is incredible. I mean, the construction and the development, they went through the last GFC without hardly a slowdown. They just kept pumping dollars into their own economy and building their own infrastructure. Right now they've got relatively high interest rates and have been bumping them up consistently in the last 12 months to try to curb inflation. And that magazine, The Economist magazine, went on to say that even if China stutters, even if China goes through a period of political upheaval, the appetite for development will not disappear, either there or in most Asian countries. Why? Because billions of Asians are eager to join the middle class, and that is true. Now, there's a lot of things that our Prime Minister says that I disagree with, but one of them is not what she said in late September. That is that the fundamentals of our economy are strong, and they are. We have low unemployment, low public debt, strong banking system growth, employment prospects. We have hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars in the investment pipeline, and we also have a record terms of trade. Now, what that simply means is that traditionally Australia would import, the value of our imports would far exceed the value of our exports. So the balance of trade was skew-iffed. Today, we sell so much more than we import, and that is just, you think of the country like a business. If you are selling more than you are buying, if you are creating more revenue in than expenditure going out, you're doing well. Australia as a nation is doing very well. There's the gross domestic product figures, and you see there that just to randomly say that this happened in Japan so it's going to happen in Australia, or this happened in the States or Europe so it's going to happen here, is ridiculous. Once upon a time we were very much coupled to Europe and America. What went on there flowed through and impacted us. The stock market is where we are still intimately tied to that part of the world. And the reason such a big fuss is made of what goes on in Europe and America is because most Australians have superannuation, and their superannuation is in the stock market. Therefore, most of us are affected by what happens over there. That said, if you divorce yourself just momentarily from the stock market, the rest of our economy is influenced more, heavily influenced by what happens in Asia. And that's a very good story. Corporate Australia says one thing and does another sometimes. And we've seen a little bit of that lately. Now, I'm agreeing we do have a two-speed economy, but where I differ is the extent of the woes in the slower sector. We have manufacturers and retailers and tourist operators bleating how terrible things are, and I'm not downplaying the challenges that some industries are facing. But when the Australian Bureau of Statistics comes out and says that a survey of the chief financial officers have revealed that their intention is to spend $148.8 billion on new capital this financial year, you have to wonder, why would they be doing that if things are so bad? The interesting thing is that figure is up 24% on last year's figures, which was a record expenditure, a record year for capital expenditure, and it's actually up 6% on what it was 3 months earlier. So in June of this year, the expectation was 6% less than what it was in September. Now, we're not just referring to the mining sector. That accounts for about half of that. But the other half is across the economy broadly, and a lot of that in the manufacturing sector. So yes, we do have a two-speed economy, but sometimes I think union leaders and industry leaders can exaggerate their plight in order to get the favourable ear of governments. And if you look at some of the decisions that have been taken of late, it was a good strategy because it worked. I love hearing people compare us with Japan. Why they would do it, I have no idea. You look at the population of Japan through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s and into 2000, and it was a growing population. They were doing well. What happened from 2005 is the population started to diminish, and in fact, for the next 45 years, from 2005 to 2050, the population is going to diminish, according to forecasts, by 21%. Right now, the median age in Japan is 45 years of age, but by 2050, it'll be 55 years of age, according to the United Nations. So what we've had in Japan is a case of massive, and I mean massive, population decline. 20% of your population is massive. People talk about a property bubble bursting there. Well, I'm not surprised. If you've got that many people leaving your population numbers and your population is aging, then of course you're going to have an imbalance in the supply-demand ratio. Of course you're going to have an oversupply of property. All that tells me is that supply and demand really is the true mark or the true indicator of the worth of everything. And people go, what about America? They had a property bubble too, didn't they? Well, they did actually. And that was because of a case of massive oversupply. They didn't have a diminishing population, but they had people building properties to meet greed rather than need. You see, in America, you could get a loan with no income, no asset, no job. Having never worked a job, you could get a loan. What security did the banks require? Nothing other than the property you were buying. So they'd lend you everything to buy a property, no security, and they had limited recourse loans, which meant that should something go wrong or you decide you don't want to keep the property, the banks can take that asset from you, but they can't touch anything else. There's no recourse other than that asset. So when you have vacancy rates reaching 10% in many cities around America, and the economy starts to get the wobbles, and you have people that have no income, no assets, no jobs, who were put on these ridiculous honeymoon rates where the rent covered the costs for the first few years, and then suddenly the interest rates jumped astronomically, what are they going to do? They did what any self-respecting person with no income, no job, no asset, no commitment would do. That's it. They put the keys in the letter, in an envelope, and posted it back to the banks. And they became known as jingle mail because the letters jingled. People literally sent their keys back to the banks, and the banks got to the point where they were asking people to stay in the homes because the amount of vacant properties that were being vandalized, derelict properties, was ridiculous. In fact, banks ended up bulldozing a number of properties because it was costing them too much just to maintain these empty properties. We don't have that situation in Australia. You have to use a deposit. You have to qualify for a loan. We have a completely different scenario. So once again, it's really, really important that we have some level of understanding of basic economics if we are going to capitalize on opportunity. Because you've got to remember that the people who were selling the concept of buying these investment properties were predominantly brokers who were selling finance. They needed a product for the finance to be attached to. Housing was a simple one. So people just kept selling finance to build housing that wasn't even needed. Why? Greed. Just wanting to make money with no real concern for the consequences that it would cause on a big scale. Do you know I liken the media a lot to that? Sometimes we think because it's in a newspaper it must be true. But the reality is that the media are in the business of selling. We say newspapers. No, it's not really newspapers. It is. It's circulation. It's advertising. The more people buying newspapers, the more they can charge for their advertising. And so newspapers will write stories that appeal to, I hate to say it, but simple thinkers, people who are easily moved by sensationalism. I mean, I cannot stand current affair type programs. They are so hyped, so sensationalized. I like news and current affairs, but I just don't like that stuff that's over the top because I don't believe most of it. It's exaggerated, it's sensational, but it sells and they get big advertising dollars from it. There is nothing wrong with watching it if you like that stuff, but please understand you cannot take your financial advice from those sources and expect to prosper. Those sorts of stories are pitched at average people, and average people end up on a pension. Australian cities are going to become more like Manhattan, an article stated in September. And at the end there it says, one way or another we're going to have to find ways to accommodate 5.7 million new people in the next 15 years, about half of whom will be hard-working immigrants under the age of 40. We are a very, very different country with a very different set of circumstances. We can no more compare Australia to Japan than we can compare retail to mining. We can no more compare Australia to the US and compare our property to their property than we can comparing, the income of someone working in the mines at Gladstone or somewhere to someone who's unemployed running around trying to, find someone who'll give them a job. If you have money, you can pay for things. If you don't, you can't. Australia is in a very different situation. Our unemployment is low, very low on global scales, and the demand for workers to meet the ever-growing mining boom has only just begun. I have a bit to say, on interest rates from time to time. I've had a pretty strong opinion on which way rates should have been moving in the last little while, and it hasn't been sideways or up. I've believed that there is a stronger case for dropping interest rates some time back. The Reserve Bank is incredibly cautious, this current board anyway, incredibly cautious. They're very slow to drop rates, even when the indicators are there, but it seems like they'll put them up at the drop of a hat. Even if they think there might be a problem that inflation is going to get out of hand, they'll put rates up. They did that in early 2008 and they went too far, and then they reacted violently by dropping them when we had the problem out of the GFC. When they stopped dropping rates in April 2009 after they hit their all-time low, I thought they really should have come down a little bit further, and they didn't. I still stand by that. I think there was too much onus, too much emphasis on what the federal government was going to do with fiscal stimulus as opposed to what the Reserve Bank could do with monetary stimulus. I'm a great believer in giving money back to individuals so that they can use it to stimulate the economy, rather than having governments tax us and then them choose where to stimulate it. Now there's a balance obviously, but giving you and me more back by lowering interest rates means that we have more to spend at Christmas, we have more to support the tourism industry, the retail sector, etc., etc. I think there is a great argument for another rate cut in December. There are not many people who think it will happen. Most people think it will happen in February or March. I think most economists and analysts are saying that the next rate movement will be down, and it will be soon, but they're just questioning whether the Reserve Bank will do it this side of Christmas. Had it not been that they were so conservative, I would go right out on a limb and say that they will do it, because I think the argument for dropping rates is screaming loud and clear. It's just they are ultra-conservative, so we'll see what happens. I guess it's safe to say that your sentiment and my sentiment, the way people feel about things, can artificially drive markets in the short term, but just as water finds its own level, or a pendulum that's swinging from side to side ultimately lands and stops in the middle, so too market forces will ultimately determine the worth of anything. And housing prices really are about supply and demand. And when you have a population that is growing, when you have an insatiable demand out of a evolving middle class, billions of people throughout China and India climbing out of poverty, wanting to enjoy a middle class existence themselves, and everything they buy pretty well requires resources. And Australia, being down under, is geographically well positioned. We're strategically positioned. We're very much politically aligned. And our economy is really driven by what goes on there. There is no way in the world we are not going to have a large immigration policy in this country. I've been saying that for years. I don't believe the rhetoric that comes from both sides of politics. We need migrants. We need skilled workers and unskilled workers. We have baby boomers, the biggest chunk of our society, exiting the workforce, turning 65 as of 1st of January 2010. As they exit the workforce, they take with them their skills. They stop paying taxes. They stop bringing home money that they spend, and they become dependent. Not all, but many of them, most of them, become dependent on the social security system. So we have more and more people coming out of the workforce and becoming dependent. Our government absolutely has to increase, broaden its tax base by having more people, young people, working, paying taxes and meeting the demands that are coming out of China. And mark my word, it is going to happen, and those people will need places to live. A picture says 1,000 words, and we have massive population growth, and our best years are definitely ahead of us. You can measure our housing shortage with high build rates, low build rates, or medium build rates. Well, this is saying by 2016, which is only really virtually 4 years away now, 372,000 homes short and 500,000 by 2020. We are in a very, very different situation from that of Japan and America. So next time someone tries to draw a conclusion on what your home is going to be worth based on what happened in Japan, just recognize the shallowness of the argument for what it is. I'm going to give you 7 pluses why I believe residential property is the best way to go. Number 1, it is the only investment market that is not dominated by investors. As I said, 70% of all residential property is owner-occupied. And over the long term, Australian property values have never fallen. That's through world wars, the Great Depression, never fallen. Number 2, you can buy residential real estate with other people's money and you get the best leverage. You can get leverage to buy Westpac shares from Westpac, but they'll loan you a lot more and require that you contribute a lot less if you were to buy a residential property. You get the best leveraging on the property that I talk about. You get poorer leveraging in serviced apartments and holiday let properties and student accommodation type properties, which is another reason why we focus on residential real estate. People understand the concept of leverage, so they think. Most people, if they had a clue on how powerful leverage was, on just how incredibly powerful leverage was, most people would want to pay mortgage insurance when they bought investment properties. Most people see it as a cost rather than an opportunity. Leverage and gearing are critical to wealth building. Residential real estate lends itself brilliantly. Number 3, it's tax efficient. As I said, you use other people's money. You've got the tenant, the tax man, paying most if not all of the expenses. Interest and expenses are fully tax deductible. Number 4, sustained capital growth. Median house prices between 1980 and 2010 broken up into 5-year chunks there. It's always gone up. I'm not saying you can't have a protracted period where property goes sideways or even backwards. We've had it. If you live in Victoria, you only have to think back to the Pyramid Building Society collapse in Geelong and the basket case that state went into, which seemed like forever. It was a few years. There was a change of government. Jeff Kennett came in and the place turned around. And if you haven't been to Victoria for a few years, you should go and check it out. Now they've got a lot of debt now. But you see the trend there. If you happen to buy a property just at one of those little peaks just before it went into a trough, the only way it's really going to hurt you is if you get out of the market. And that's why trading and speculating or buying and selling, when you have to try and time the market, it isn't set and forget. It's sort of white knuckle ride stuff. You got to make sure you're buying at the right time and you're selling at the right time and your costs are all right. But if you buy and hold and you just go from home to work, work to home, home to work, work to home on the train with the next person, treat it like your superannuation. It'll work for you, perhaps unlike your superannuation. Australian property price growth has averaged 10.4% over 120 years of history. That's impressive, but the United Kingdom have records that go back 920 years, and they've averaged 10.2%. As I said before, residential real estate has never gone backwards over the medium to long term. Number 5, it gives you an ever-growing income. Well, rents historically outpace inflation. We have a growing population. We currently have 30% of people renting, with the Australian Bureau of Statistics telling us that will soon become 40%. Home ownership is a dream in some parts of the world. And more, I believe, we'll have a situation of the haves and the have-nots in this country. Number 6, it works for whosoever. You don't need a degree. You don't need a singing voice. You don't need to be a rocket scientist. You don't have to go to university. You just have to have a steady income. You just have to be working and have something to get started with, whether that's equity in an existing property that you own or equity in someone else's property. You can even have a term deposit tied up. You know, you could have a parent wanting to help a child and they've got some cash set aside that they're not going to be doing anything with. It's in a term deposit. So that term deposit could be offered up as security. It's not used, it's not drawn upon. It's just there as security to help maybe the child get started. Of course, if your child is irresponsible, it's not going to work, because if they do a runner and they don't meet the payments, then the banks come after you. But obviously, parents know their kids and they wouldn't do it for a child if the child was like that. But you can get started with very little and begin building wealth. And finally, it's the stuff of millionaires. We all know that McDonald's are in the property business. They use hamburgers as a vehicle, but they're not so much interested in owning those franchises or owning the produce in or the product in the stores, but they do own, this is the Kroc family, they own the real estate all over the world. that house McDonald's stores. The franchise owners own the business, but they can never own the real estate. That remains in the hands of one family. So let's just look briefly at how the property cycle works. What tends to happen is prices shoot up fairly quickly over a shorter period of time. They generally overshoot because people jump on board at the wrong time and create artificial stimulus and pay too much. Then the market settles down, it comes back to its equilibrium for a protracted period of time. And it goes like this. About this point on the cycle, we start to hear mixed messages. There's been a lot of pessimism, about property and doom and gloom, but all of a sudden you start reading some good stuff and some positive stories, and you sort of think, well, there's a bit of contradiction going on here. Somebody saying this market's good and somebody saying this market's still bad. When you hear that contradiction, generally it's an indication that the market is turning. Whether that's turning up or turning down, but it's turning. And it's about this point in time that it starts to become apparent. Notice the market has already moved, but the media are a little bit slow to catch on. They don't lead, they follow. Like a bad accountant. A good accountant will help you strategize and plan, not merely record what happened. Well, the media are great at recording what's blatantly obvious under your nose, but not very good at picking trends. So you get mixed messages. Some people see the glass half full, others half empty. Some people are going, yippee, look, there's opportunity, and others are going, boo-hoo, this is never going to come good, I've had this property for a while, and blah, blah, blah. It is about here, however, when most of the talk has come around. There's very little negative press anymore. Everyone's talking the market up. Everyone's talking about the opportunities that's to be had. Everybody knows that you can make money in property in Melbourne or Sydney or Perth or wherever the market happens to be that's taking off at that particular time. The trick was picking it just before it happened. So you go to a barbecue and you're sitting around, and everywhere you turn, people are talking about, and there's someone who made this money, or this is happening, and you go home and you think, we've been talking about it for years, we really should do something. Yeah, we really should. And I'm not sure, and you think about it, you procrastinate for a little bit longer, and maybe 6, 9, 12 months come and goes again, and you keep hearing about the money people are making, and you think about it, and then bang, you jump in. Right at the top. Now that's where the average person gets involved in property. And they say that something like, I can't remember the exact percentages, but there's a huge percentage of them that sell within the first 5 years. You know why? Because their only experience from the day they settled the property was it softened and then it went nowhere. They wait. Ever hopeful. The optimism starts to fade. The rates notice comes in. The optimism fades more. The body corporate notice comes in. The optimism fades a little more, and then they get a phone call saying that the hot water system blew. You started out really, really happy. Your happiness becomes a bit of despondency and you're not really sure. You feel like you got a bit of a black eye after a while. Maybe you do have a black eye because after all it was your fault. Your wife told you not to buy that stupid thing and you insisted, you smart aleck you. Maybe not literally a black eye, but you know that the mistake was yours. It wasn't her doing, or vice versa. And you get to the point where you may even literally shed a tear, or just on the inside you feel like, all I want to do is provide for my kids. I just want to get ahead. Why does it have to be so hard? I made the decision to try to get ahead. People capitulate and sell just before the market takes off again. I haven't got a circle drawn there, but generally it's the darkest before the dawn, and people buy at the peak and sell at the trough. You'll see the lines, the first couple of lines there. The first one says 2 to 3 years and the next one says 5 to 7. Well, that's time frame. When a market is going hot, growing, and it varies, like Sydney is still growing, it's nearing, it's like most, Sydney's a long way up at the moment. It hasn't peaked, but I expect it will in 2012. Melbourne peaked last year, peaked before people realised it, and it's coming off the boil now. Perth went through this in 2006 and 7, and then 2008 kept going, but peaked. Southeast Queensland did the same thing between late 2001 and mid-2004. And look, I'm the first to admit it. It's gone sideways, and I mean, there's been, growth and bits and pieces, but by and large, it's done very little for the best part of 7 years now. And just before the GFC, it looked like the market was going to take off again, and then the GFC came and it was an interruption. And then last year it looked like it was going to take off again, and then we had the storms and the floods, and rocked a lot of people's confidence, even though those things were fairly contained to certain areas. But still, human emotion and sentiment will drive a market up or down, and it will impact on a market temporarily in the short term. But make no, or have no doubt, just as you cannot hold a beach ball underwater forever, it will beat you. Your arms will tire. It will come to the surface. So too will a market correct back to its equilibrium. It happened in Japan. Population growth diminished, the market corrected. It happened in America. Greed pushed the market too high, the market corrected. And I believe it's happening in parts of Australia too. So hang in there, guys. If you've got property and right now you're going through the tough times, you will find in every doubling cycle there is more years of despondency or nothingness happening than there are good times. Once you've been through your first doubling cycle, you've got some equity, you've got some rental increases, and generally the property is a breeze to hang on to because it's already doing well, and even though it might be going sideways for a few years, you're not worried. It's in that very, very first doubling cycle that you are the most vulnerable. That's when you're the most tempted to capitulate to a rates notice, a body corporate notice, because you haven't seen the evidence in your own life of how great it is. That's why most people who buy an investment property only ever buy one and they sell it. Statistics are that if you go on to buy two properties or more, if you go on to buy two properties, you will not stop at two. You'll go on to buy 3, 4, and 5. It's getting over that first one. That's the learning curve. That's the one that's so important to mentor you. That's the one that's so important to have a support structure. That's why it's so important to get your borrowing capacity sorted first. Don't make unwise decisions. To get your finance structure in place to minimize the holding costs. That's why it is so important. We so want people to have a good experience and get through. And look, I'm not going to fluff it up and say it's all going to, just because it's set and forget, you'll never be challenged. You will be. And I don't control markets. I didn't make the GFC happen, and it took me by surprise. But life's like that. Stuff happens, and you've got to learn to deal with it. And what doesn't kill you, you get bigger and better. So if you approach it and you stick all the odds in your favour and you do it properly and you buy wisely and you stick to residential, statistically speaking, you're going to do really, really well. But you are going to have a struggle. Is your human emotion, how you feel on any given day, going to dominate? Or what I started at the outside, I talked about your dreams, your goals and your aspirations. Are they going to dominate? Because if you're motivated and dominated by a vision in front of you of what could be, you'll get through. People talk about, companies that run motivational sessions and have big conferences, and they say, oh, it's just a big rah-rah hype session. Well, maybe it is. But let's face it, human emotions drive all of us, so good ones are good. You wake up in the morning, there's bad news. You go to work, you're putting out bushfires, stuff goes wrong. That's life. You miss the train, you miss the bus, you lose a wallet, a kid gets sick. But there's enough negative, can I say crap? I'm sorry, I don't want to offend anyone, but there is enough negative crap that goes on that a little bit of positive goes a long way. And I believe that if more people stayed focused, in tune with the things that are important to them, with the reasons why they're doing stuff, the little hiccups and speed bumps that go wrong would be insignificant. I mean, changing a dirty nappy is insignificant when compared to the joy of a new baby. You got to get it in context. You got to get your dreams and your goals and your property investing all in context. And I promise you, you will separate yourself from the 95%, perhaps even the 97%, and you will become part of that very small group of people who achieves financial independence. If you don't quit, you'll make it. The biggest roadblock that I find stands between most people and their dreams and goals is cash flow. You know, there's probably a lot of people listening to this right now who say, well, look, it all makes sense, but you don't understand, I can't afford it. Well, I do understand, and that's why I've got this section. I'm going to show you how to deal with the cash flow issue, because I'm going to say this and I'm going to say it, I'm going to say it. There's so much more to investing in property than just finding a property and finding a lender. There is so much more. Having the right support and the right input. It's like having a business and having the right advisors and the right accountants. It can mean the difference between it working and failing, wiping you out, putting you into bankruptcy, or doing incredibly well. So number one, the strategy I want to talk about is MRD's advanced financing strategies. We don't chase cash flow, we chase capital growth. That's where wealth is created. But you need cash flow in order to create capital growth. So look at this example, and if you've been distracted or nodded off, this is the time you want to wake up, because this will blow your mind. Now, hopefully it'll be a small explosion and nobody around you will be hurt, but it will blow your mind. Okay, there's a property that you're looking at. It's $416,000 just for the sake of this example, and the purchase costs are roughly $15,000. I'm going to assume this is being bought by a couple earning $80,000 and $30,000 respectively. Okay, she earns 80, he earns 30, or vice versa, it makes no difference, and they're buying the property in an equal split, 50-50. We've factored in all of the costs, all of the stuff there. The rent here, by the way, is where is it? Can't even see it. Oh, $400 a week. There it is. So it's just your average property. $400 a week, $416,000 property, house and land package, 4 beds, 2 bath, double garage, etc. And you can have it so long as you're prepared to chip in $244 a week from your after-tax dollars. It's worth it, but I appreciate the fact that a lot of people just simply can't afford it. So let's just look at one thing we can do. If we change the ownership split from 50-50 to 90-10, because the incomes are 80 and 30, different tax brackets, by changing the ownership split so that the greater percentage is in the hands of the person who pays the most tax, you can bring the cost down by $30 a week, and it'll only cost you $214. Okay. You go to your side panel and put up your hand if you want one. No, seriously, I understand that once again it's worth it, but you know, you have to be able to afford it. And if you can't, you just go out and buy that, you're being reckless. And if you crash and burn, you're going to have a bad taste in your mouth, you're going to blame property, and everyone around you go, oh, that didn't work, I know so-and-so who bought a property and they couldn't afford it, and blah, 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 and there you go. And the myth gets perpetuated. Let's just change paradigms for a minute. You're not going to buy property. You're going to go into business for yourself. It just happens to be a property business. You're not going to have staff. You're not going to have stock and equipment. But you're going to buy property and you're going to build a property portfolio. But instead of seeing it as, well, I'm a plumber who's got a couple of investment properties, no, I'm building my investment property business and I'm doing plumbing on the side to help afford it. A change of paradigm or mindset can make all the difference. Because if you're an investor, a business owner, if you're a business owner and you're looking at the value of your investment in your business, you're not going to invest in something today and expect an immediate return. You have that understanding. I open a coffee shop, it probably won't be profitable straight away. So I need some reserves. Okay. If that $214, or call it 11 grand a year, just a little over 11 grand, was earning me 5% in a business or some form of investment, I'd get back $556. If it was earning me 10%, I'd get a little over $1,100 back. Now this property, let's assume that it took 8 years to double or averaged a 9% growth rate. We've already said that in Australia over 120 years the average growth has been 10.4%. Some decades it does better, some decades it does not so well, but that's what it averages. We're going to assume a 9% growth. That would mean that this property was returning you $37,500 a year. Now you don't see it because it's not paid to you as a cash dividend, but it is equity that you can access later on. So is it worth spending $214 a week or $1,100 a year for a $37,500 return? Well, in terms of what is that, it comes to 337%. So you go along, would you put $214 into a bank account every week? Would you find savings in your budget? Would you plug the wastage and the unnecessary spending? Cut back on some coffees and takeaway meals and maybe even a restaurant meal for a little while to get a 337% return? Of course you would, if you have a goal, if you have a dream. So that cost, $214 or 11 grand a year, represents your business overheads, 2.6%. So what's your break-even point? Well, if your business is if your business overheads are costing you 2.6%, so long as this property were to double in value in 27 years, you break even. If it doubles in value anything better than 27 years, you are ahead. Okay, the purpose of saying that was to stress just how phenomenally brilliant residential property is as an investment, but I still acknowledge that if you don't have the $214 and you're already doing it tough and you're paying school fees and a lot of people don't waste money. They're doing it, they're living very, very frugally. Okay, so how on earth can we afford this property? Okay, well, if you talk to our finance department or one of the property mentors, it may be possible to apply the advanced financing strategies, which, without going into all the details of that tonight, suffice to say that this spreadsheet contains everything. It brings your holding costs down to $69 for the same couple, same income, same everything. So we've gone from 244 to 214 to 69. That now represents a 1,045% return on investment. $69 invested to get back $37,500 a year. Now, if you can't afford the $69, it may be possible to structure it so that that is eliminated too. I certainly would not tell you to do that, but I would put you in touch with someone, probably your accountant, to get a private ruling from the ATO. So we can talk to you about that if that's of interest to you. But let's just leave it at the $69 for now. So the little things, just talking to someone like Heather at MRD Finance. Heather is absolutely super qualified. She ran Colonial State Bank's head office branch, retail branch off of the head office in Sydney. That's Martin Place. Before that, she was with Westpac, and when she was with the Colonial, not only did she run the retail branch of head office and all the staff, but she had to deal with management and all the politics that go with that. Then they were swallowed up by the Commonwealth, so she was with Commonwealth, and she spent a number of years as a broker, and she is sharp. She is very, very good. And MRD Finance today has a credit license, which means that the finance that we can access is no longer limited to just the banks, building societies and credit unions. It expands to mortgage managers and all sorts of some very, very competitive lending. Now, Heather, as part of her role, is able to look at your financial structure, situation as it currently is, and tell you very quickly whether or not there's any ways that you could improve. For Katrina and me, she identified that 3 of our loans we were paying too much interest and saved us literally thousands of dollars. I didn't refinance, I just phoned the banks concerned. And in one instance, I had to fill in paperwork. Simple stuff. Didn't have to qualify, I had to ask. Now, the reason I was paying too much was not because I was paying too much when I got the loans, but competition had brought in new products. And like a mobile phone plan, I was on the old plan, and I didn't realize there was a better plan, and all I had to do was ask. And when I asked the bank to give me the back money for the last 3 years that I've been missing out and overcharged, they pointed out that I wasn't, in fact, overcharged. I just hadn't bothered to ask. So sometimes those little 1%ers can mean thousands of dollars in your pockets. So I strongly recommend at the end of the session that you fill in the My Starting Point. You can make comments to Heather and tell her exactly what you would hope that she could help you with, but that is something that is well worth considering. There's some of our wonderful staff, just some of them, all just ordinary people like you and me, all investing. Number 2 is the National Rental Affordability Scheme, or NRAS as it's known. It's a government-introduced scheme without, it is a government scheme that was introduced in the 08-09 tax year, where 50,000 allocations were put up for grabs, and the government didn't bother talking to the banks. They didn't bother explaining it. It was a dog's breakfast of a scheme with hairs all over it. You wouldn't have wanted to be involved. I wouldn't have. Certainly, I wasn't prepared to promote it back then, and no bank would touch it anyway. To cut a long story short, the scheme has been completely changed, new legislation. Once in the scheme, you're no longer locked into the scheme. Banks will now look at it, not all of them, but some of them. And what started out as a slow take-up is fast becoming a stampede. The final allocations must be in the market by July of next year. It is a finite scheme. It will put in excess of $100,000 into your pocket as a grant from the government, but it's not going to be around forever. You get a refundable tax offset. At the moment it's $9,500. Well, that's for the 30th of June just gone. I don't know what it'll be next year. They index it each year. And it goes for 10 years from when you enter the scheme. So it'll be in excess of $100,000. The trade-off is that you must deal with a recognised consortium, and there are additional fees involved. You must reduce the rent, usually by 20%. In some instances, depending on the consortium, it may be 25%. You must rent to people within certain income brackets. You don't deal with the property manager, the consortium does, you deal with the consortium. But it is not public housing. A single person can earn more than $42,000 and still qualify, and a couple with 3 kids can earn in excess of $100,000 and still be allowed to rent one of these properties. NRAS is a bonus. If you're going 4-wheel driving, you don't buy Mazda 3 because they're on special. If you're going into the Sydney to Hobart, you don't buy a speedboat because you got a good deal on it. You need to buy the appropriate vehicle to achieve the desired goal and outcome. It comes down to planning and strategy and knowing what you want to achieve and the time frame you want to achieve it in. Finding the right property needs to fit with your overall plan. Starting with a strategy is so important. We still look for capital growth, but it just may be that an NRES property will serve your purposes and give you the benefits of the government incentive. So I'm going back to that example. That exact same property with the same couple earning the same income, the 50-50 split that was going to cost them $244 a week to hold. That's non-NRES. That's a standard house and land. Exactly the same everything, but now we're going to apply the NRES allocation, bonus. We'll put an NRES allocation on it. We're going to apply the bonuses plus the additional costs. Everything's been applied here, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it now brings your holding costs down to $109, which is a saving of $135 a week. Then the next example was a non-NRES property where we just changed the ownership split and saved you $30 a week. So taking that exact same example and changing nothing but putting on the NRES allocation means that it would only cost you $77 a week to hold that property. Then we took it one step further under the non-NRES example, and we said you speak to Heather, you look to see if you could have the advanced financing strategies applied to you and bring the holding costs down to $69 without NRES. We take everything else exactly the same and apply NRES, and we now have turned a property into $60 a week positive cash flow. So we've gone from $244 out of pocket each week to 60 bonus dollars into your pocket because you now hold an asset that, if history repeats itself, will double in value over the next 7 years and give you $400,000 worth of equity. So once again, it's a matter of having a plan, doing it correctly, and having people with knowledge assist you to go about it all correctly. I mean, when my hairdresser cuts my hair, she makes it look easy. When people sing on stage, they make it look easy. When you see people who can dance, it looks easy. And sometimes you look at people who are buying investment property and you go, that's easy, I'll just go and do it. I've been in this game now for a decade and a half, and it astounds me. It just astounds me at how people continually make the same mistakes over and over again. They assume, they think. Pigs don't know that pigs stink. I don't know what I don't know, and you don't know what you don't know. But a little bit of knowledge can be dangerous, as with plumbing, electrical, mechanics, you name it. A little bit of knowledge can be can be dangerous, and it's no different with NRES. There's a number of things that you need to be mindful. What if you leave the scheme? How are rents, market rents, determined and agreed to? What are the additional costs? What's a consortium? Who are they, and what rules do the lenders have? What about serviceability? I was told I could borrow $400,000. Does that mean I can automatically borrow the same with NRES, or do the banks treat it all differently? I mean, there's a number of questions that you really need to understand with NRES, and if this is something that's of interest to you, we're happy to help you with it. The next strategy that you can look at is not so much, well, most people have super and they've got money going into super, so a strategy that I would suggest is to say, you've got super anyway. Is it possible that that could actually be working for you rather than just existing and you hope one day maybe there's something there? For the last decade, superannuation throughout Australia across all industry and retail funds has averaged 3.3% growth per annum. Inflation has averaged 3.3% growth per annum. What does that mean? It means you've made Zippo. You've just tread water, kept your head above the water. You haven't drowned, but you've just kept up with inflation. Where is your superannuation invested? The stock market. What has the stock market averaged over the same time frame? Better than 9%. That was before the last couple of months, so I don't know if the figures will be revised down a bit. I suppose they will be. But what's the difference between the 3.3 that you've been paid and the 9% that they've earned? Good question. My strong recommendation is if you have in excess of 100,000 in super, ideally 130 or more, you may be able to get away with it with, closer to the 100 mark, subject to what level of contributions are going in. Some employers pay a lot more than 9%, for example. Or if you and your partner combined have those sorts of funds in super, or perhaps a family, mum, dad, and a couple of working children, you can have up to 4 people in your own superannuation fund. Strongly understand what self-managed super could do for you. You see, up until a handful of years ago, you could not leverage, you could not borrow money. If you had 100,000 in super, you could invest 100,000 and you get a return on 100,000. Now you can leverage that 100,000 to control an asset perhaps worth 300 or 400 or whatever the figures may be. So let's say you've got 100, I'll be more realistic, let's say you've got 150 for argument's sake between you and 3 other people or 2 other people or 1 other person, and you don't even have to know each other, although it helps. But if you've got 150,000 and then you can leverage into a property, especially if you've got 4 people and you've got 4 lots of super contributions going in. I mean, if one person's got that much money and they've just got their 9% going in, they'll have a different borrowing capacity than if a few of you team up together. But anyway, if you leveraged into a property, when that property doubles in value, your super fund owns that asset. And the good thing is that you didn't use the super fund's money. You did in part for the deposit, but you actually leveraged and used the bank's money. So you could control perhaps a $450,000 or maybe a $500,000 asset with your $150,000 in super. So keeping the numbers conservative, let's say it was just a $400,000 asset. When it doubles, you have now got an $800,000 asset, and you did that off a base of $150,000. And the good news is once you go into pension phase, you can sell the assets in your super fund capital gains tax free. Or you can collect the income from your asset, being the rent from your property, income tax free. Some people may even have a property that they're intending on selling to help them with their retirement that's in their own name. Did you know that it may be possible, subject to your situation and age, to transfer a property that's currently in your name into your own self-managed super fund without incurring stamp duty and transfer costs, and then sell that property in pension phase tax-free and clear debt? Once again, I'm not giving financial advice. Please do not take anything I say and act on it. But talk to us, and what we can't help you with directly, we can put you in touch with people that we trust, that we know, and we trust to entrust our clients with. You don't know what you don't know, but those little 1%ers may amount to many tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars down the annals of time in additional wealth for you and your family. Super has all sorts of tax advantages. 15% on the way in. Reduce capital gains tax if you were to sell a property before you're in pension phase. All I'm saying, compare, consider, and ask the question. Once again, on that My Starting Point form, you can put down the details of what you currently have approximately, because people don't know exactly, in your super fund and your partner super fund, and you can make a little question there, say, I am interested in finding out more about this or that. We're not going to jump all over you like an unwanted rash, but we will meet you where you are and help you get the answers that you need to make informed decisions to move forward. Number 4 is the Queensland Building Boost, and it's got 77 days to go. That's including weekends and Christmas and everything. What that means is that if you're buying a property in Queensland that's brand new, never been lived in, and it's under $600,000 in value, the Queensland government will give you, provided you're a resident, $10,000. Why? Because they want to incentivize you to provide more housing. They don't do that when there's an oversupply, nor does the federal government do that when there is an oversupply. But Australia does not have an oversupply. We have an undersupply. So there's $10,000, money for jam. It's not taxed. It's paid to you at settlement. It's a bonus. The door shuts on the 31st of January. Contracts must be signed and executed, although the property doesn't have to have been built or settled or built, whichever. The obvious question is to say, well, is it possible, Nick, to buy a property that I get this $10,000 from the Queensland government inside my super fund? Yes. Then you go, what if the property had an NRAS allocation on it? Could I then also turn around and get the $100,000? Yes. You're catching on. And what about if we applied the advanced financing strategies? Is it possible that that property could really put money in my pocket? Absolutely. I'm actually putting together a syndicate deal on a brilliant project in Brisbane at the moment. I have been overwhelmed with responses to an email that I sent out, I think it was Wednesday of last week. I've never done it before. I'm syndicating a handful of buyers. I'm going to the development. I've already got a really, really good deal on this development because he wants pre-sales, but I'm going to go back and syndicate interested people and get him to pay stamp duty, a year's body corporate, and guarantee the rent for 2 years so that you have rent from day one guaranteed for 2 years at 0.5% better than what the market is paying anyway. Anyway, if you're interested, let us know. But I suppose what I'm saying is, in all the doom and all the gloom and all the pessimism and all the naysayers and all the glass is half full and all the concern and the worry, the harsh reality is opportunity is everywhere. If you do things properly, you work with people who have understanding that goes beyond just bricks and mortar. Opportunity is literally everywhere, and there is a potential for you to set yourself up so that you're not dependent on a pension. Number 5, and the final strategy I want to talk about, is muscle towns, and actually looking at properties that are very high yielding without compromising the potential for capital growth. It's very easy to find a great yielding property where you sacrifice growth, but getting the balance right between the two is the key, because you will not create wealth on rent. You will create wealth through equity. The key to this strategy is understanding the difference between a muscle town and just a boom town. Understanding a little bit about economics. A lot of my industry peers have great knowledge of property and bricks and mortar, but when you talk to them about economics and what's going on and monetary policies and fiscal policies, they're completely out to lunch and they have no clue. And sometimes I struggle to work out how you can genuinely separate the two, because we're talking about an investment market. We're talking about understanding trends and not following markets, but sort of getting in. And anyway, I think you get the idea. If you understand what's really happening in the economy and you're not taking your financial advice from a $2 newspaper or a current affairs program which is pitched at simple people who are stimulated by sensationalism and cameras chasing someone down the street making accusations, we can piggyback the changes in our economy. Don't be caught in the LP record industry when CDs are displacing them. Don't be caught in the CD industry when MP3s are displacing them. Understand that technology in the 70s put a whole lot of people out of the manufacturing workplace and replace them with robots. Understand that toll operators no longer exist because tolls are all automated now. Yes, industries will come and industries will go, but if we understand how to position ourselves, opportunity is everywhere. Western Australia actually has the highest dollar value of capital expenditure planned in the fiscal year 2012. It's got 111.7 billion compared to Queensland's 81 billion in this fiscal year. However, Queensland's resource areas are found in population centres where strong industry already exists. Now you take a place like Karratha or Port Hedland. Karratha has 25,000 people and a median house price of 900,000. Port Hedland, 13,000, median house price of 1.05 mil. Most people are completely priced out of that market and they think, shoulda, coulda, woulda, if only. But you think about those places with such phenomenal prices on their property, and really there's, with few exceptions, there's not a lot of reason for being there other than mining. If the mines closed, the towns would die. Then you compare with places like Gladstone and Mackay, which are two of the three muscle towns I'm going to talk about. Gladstone has a population of 60,000 and Mackay nearly 120, close to, with median house prices well within most people's reach. Now I can't honestly, with any level of integrity, say that Gladstone and Mackay are today where Karratha and Port Hedland were just a handful of years ago, and that it won't be long before the median prices there will go through the roof and most people will be priced out of those markets. But there is a very real possibility that that'll happen, a very real possibility. In fact, some would argue there's a stronger possibility because of the investment spending that is going on there now and because of what those cities already represent before all this new money is being poured in. Let me explain. There are 399 projects valued at 430 billion in this country. These are mining projects. 94 advanced projects where the final investment has already been approved, totaling $173.5 billion. That's 64% up on what it was in 2010, or what they proposed in 2010. I mean, our economy is absolutely in the fast lane. There is the possibility of us, if we understand what's going on, piggybacking this. Take coal seam gas, just as an example. A waste product. Literally, it was a waste product up until a few years ago. It's fast becoming one of our most sought after sources of energy. Coal seam gas is a baby industry. Most of the investment and the spending has all been in preparatory, exploration, getting ready. Contracts have been signed in recent years, massive, massive contracts, hundreds of billions of dollars to supply coal seam gas, or to provide the gas which comes from the coal seam into 2030 and beyond. Now that green block you see there is Queensland's share. There is absolutely no doubt whatsoever that Queensland has a monopoly on coal seam gas, and it's fairly well concentrated to the Surat Basin. The moment Queensland are advertising, we need you, come here, we've got 3,500 jobs to fill immediately and 38,000 more on the way, blah, blah, blah. There's a big push to get people here. So right now, there are a number of exciting opportunities for the property market, despite what you're going to hear in the newspapers that are literally there to sell advertising. MRD has the hotspots when it comes to investing for capital growth with cash flow. As I mentioned, there's 173.5 billion in advanced projects that have been approved nationwide, 80 billion of which are Queensland's. And the big difference, these are focused in areas that are already economically strong, already diversified, already have lifestyle factors that keep people wanting to come back. They're not going there just for the mining. The demand for jobs and the potential growth in these muscle towns offers a huge, huge opportunity for you and me to piggyback and create wealth. So we've identified what we think are the 3 top boom towns that will create fortune over the next decade. Now these boom towns have a muscle factor, and I'm going to talk about that. Traditionally, you can have a town that's going nowhere, doing nothing, a mine opens and bang, suddenly the place goes gangbusters, it goes berserk. As long as the mine is good, property prices are pushed up, rents are high, etc., etc. That's a boom town. But what was the underlying muscle? What was the underlying thing that held that together pre-mining? Nothing. Maybe a pub and a corner store and a service station. Well, the 3 regions that we call the 3 regions that I'm referring to, we call them muscle towns because the town supports a greater region than just itself. These are towns that produce and contribute a huge portion of the state's GDP. They already have an established economy, strong industry, strong employment, diversity. They're not reliant on one sector. Infrastructure is in place. There is a lifestyle factor. People want to live there. They're serviced with transport, hospitals, schools, medical, shopping, etc. Places where the government and private enterprise are currently pouring huge amounts of money into. So that's the muscle factor. The next factor is the boom factor. Boom is what is going to propel that town forward from 2011, 12 and beyond. The boom factor is where the opportunity lies. Number 1 is Gladstone. It is the industrial muscle city of Queensland. It's about 500 kilometres from Brisbane with a population of 60,000 and median house prices of 415. It's been built on a very, very impressive industrial base. These are things that already exist. It's got the world's largest alumina refinery and Australia's largest aluminium smelter. It's got Australia's largest cement operation, Queensland's biggest power station, Queensland's largest multi-commodity port. It's a strong agricultural base, and it's the doorway to the Southern Barrier Reef. That's the muscle factor. Now add the boom factor. $70 billion in LNG projects have either been planned or approved, creating up to 30,000 construction and project operation jobs. The population between now and 2031 is expected to double, and the vacancy rate is 0. People are literally living in tents and out of the back of their cars. Okay, typical house and land that we've got in Gladstone, and literally these come and go daily, but a typical house and land in Gladstone, assuming the same 80,000 and 30,000 incomes respectively, will put $108 a week into your pocket. It's already cash flow positive, assuming we use MRD's advanced financing strategies. With conventional financing, it'll cost you $22 a week, which is pretty close to neutral. And by the second year, that probably would be neutral or positive anyway. The second muscle town is Mackay, which is actually the gateway to the Bowen Basin and the Barrier Reef. So you've got the best of both worlds. It's 800 kilometres from Brisbane. The Bowen Basin has the single largest coal reserve in Australia, and it's rapidly expanding. There are 34 operational coal mines there now, which represents 83% of Queensland's total coal production. It's the hub of the Bowen Basin mining industry and the largest sugar producing area in all of Australia. It's the host city for much of the engineering, manufacturing and mining services industry, supporting the wider regional economy. Okay, so it's already a muscle town. Now let's add the boom factor. Currently the City Council have recently announced a revitalisation of the CBD with $2 billion going in new infrastructure. the population is expected to increase to a whopping 155,500 people, which is actually a 78% growth, or 68,000 people between now and 2031. 51,000 new dwellings are required by 2031 based on current forecasts, and they've got 50 major projects planned over the next few years which will create up to 30,000 jobs over a 6-year period. They're expanding the Hay Point coal port, which will position it to be literally the largest in the world, and they're spending $410 million redeveloping the Mackay-based hospital. Now, I hope you're catching on the difference between a boom town and a muscle town. Now, you say, well, why don't you look at boom towns? Well, we got property in boom towns. If you really want one, we can get you one. But set and forget isn't for 4 years or 5 years or 10 years. It's set and forget. We're talking about building wealth that you can pass on to your children. So we're looking for areas that will sustain themselves, that aren't dependent on a single industry, that will grow beyond the current mining boom. A typical house and land package in Mackay will put $61 back into your pocket using advanced financing strategies. That's assuming a house worth $425,000, renting for $540 a week, incomes $80 and $30,000 respectively. Number 3 is Toowoomba. It's a picturesque mountain city located in the southeast part of Queensland, about 125 kilometres west of Brisbane, and it sits on the escarpment of the Great Dividing Range, 700 metres above sea level. It's got breathtaking views from the city, across the Tabletop Mountain, the Lockyer Valley, and across the region right through to the east. It's actually Queensland's largest inland city, or largest inland regional city, and, well, city, I was right the first time, and it's considered the CBD of the West. Now, the strength of Toowoomba as it is today, the muscle, if you like, is that it is the CBD of the West. It's the economic hub of the whole of the Darling Downs. It has an incredibly diverse economy, manufacturing, agriculture, education, medical. They've got 23 private schools there, a technical college, a university. The Oki Army base is only 20 minutes west. And the region, including Ipswich, last year created 14,000 jobs, which was actually 64% of the state's total. Their unemployment is 1%. Now, Toowoomba is the gateway to the Surat Basin, and that is where the coal seam gas is coming from. It's predicted to be one of Australia's largest energy provinces. The proposed capital expenditure there in the Surat Basin is $140 billion. It's a great story to be told. That's the muscle. Now let's look at the boom factor. Well, there's a whole new industrial area planned for Toowoomba. It's called the Charlton Well Camp Enterprise Industrial Area. Who knows who named it and why they did, but anyway. When it's fully developed, it's expected to employ between 12 and 15,000 people and increase the gross regional product in that area by almost a third, or 30%. The Surat Basin estimated $80 billion to $100 billion of works in the pipeline now. Some approved, some yet to be approved, but that's the sort of money we're talking about being spent. And then remember, this is an industry that didn't exist a few years ago. Coal seam gas was a waste product. They're now estimating another 45,000 jobs to be created across the region, with Toowoomba being the focus for accommodation. And of course, if you're an accountant, a solicitor, you think of all the spin-off industries that have to set up, right? Toowoomba's the place. The Surat Basin isn't dependent just on coal seam gas though. It's got gas, coal, power, solar, coal seam gas, water, rain, farming, and all the support industries. Two-thirds of all Queensland's jobs last year were created in that wider Toowoomba region. It's a bit of a secret. Not everybody realises what's about to happen in Toowoomba, Michael Matusik, who's an incredibly respected property analyst, recently came out and said it is the boom city in Queensland. It is the city to watch. Now, we have a number of, well, I say number, there's a few different house and land type of investment packages there. They are all house and land, and we can get up to 8.75% rental yield, which will put $25 a week back in your pocket. Now, Toowoomba will not give you the same level of rental yield as Gladstone and Mackay will now. A typical standard 4-bedroom home rented to a family will cost you money to hold. But I believe that's short-lived. I believe what is happening in terms of the growth, the demand as coal seam gas takes off, will make any short-term investment more than justified. It comes down to horses for courses and us assessing your individual situation, your long-term goals and aspirations, and making sure that the property is going to be right for you. You couldn't go with not giving an honourable mention to Townsville and the Hunter Valley in New South Wales. Townsville, for example, is gradually, maybe not so gradually, assuming the mantle of Queensland's second state capital, certainly the capital of the north there. The population growth between 05 and 09 was 13%, or in excess of 13%. Once again, a diverse economy. They've got mining, defence, medical, educational. Some of the offshore mining projects in New Guinea and places, they'll have fly-in, fly-out workers from Cairns and Townsville. It's Australia's largest army base. It's got the biggest hospital in North Queensland. It's got the James Cook University, which is pretty renowned and well known. People come from all over the world to go there. Several billions of dollars in government and private sector expenditure on infrastructure projects are either planned or underway. It was included in the first stage of the NBN rollout. And interestingly, more people rent historically in Townsville than in any other metropolitan area. 48% of the population are renters. Now, the area that we have NRAS house and land packages in has a 0 vacancy rate. Across Townsville in general, the vacancy rate for rental properties is 1%, which is considered a chronic shortage. They have some of the highest wages in all of Queensland. And typically you can get a house and land package in there from about $328,000 with NRAS. Now, once again, I said before, a little bit of knowledge is dangerous. It's a matter of checks, balances, making sure something is right for you. But no doubt with the NRAS, these would put cash back into most people's pockets. I think most people would be cash flow positive, but we can certainly run the numbers on your individual situation. We're just winding down now, but I want to mention briefly the Hunter Valley in New South Wales. New South Wales is predicted to have the largest housing shortage in Australia. I showed that on a slide earlier. And the Hunter region, whoa, what happened then? I've lost my PowerPoint. I have no idea what's happened then. Bear with me, guys. Here we go, back again. Yeah, the Hunter region is predicted to have the largest increase in population of any New South Wales region outside of Sydney. There's a huge pressure on the rental market, supply and demand. It comes down to that every time. They're spending $1.7 billion in infrastructure, and VIS Shrapnel, we spend a lot of money to subscribe to their stuff, but they expect the median house prices to rise by a further 18% by 2014. And one of the benefits of New South Wales is there's no stamp duty payable at this stage. It's an incentive from their government to buy a new house never lived in. So once again, there's just a couple of places that would deserve an honourable mention. And we do have property in these areas. And of course the ripple effect. No boom happens, you can't throw a rock in the water without the ripple effect. Well, because of mining and the investment in Queensland, Brisbane is the head office, the place where head offices are being set up for mining companies. Not just mining companies, but spin-off businesses and industries and people who are benefiting from the mining boom at large. 55,000 square metres of office space has been absorbed recently in Brisbane. And I absolutely believe it's at the bottom of the cycle. Its upswing is long overdue. And even though in every cycle, your property should double in value, if you can pick a property, if you can pick a market that's set to move sooner, then you can get that capital growth sooner and leverage off it and jump into another market or whatever. But jobs and more jobs means houses and houses, and rents in Brisbane are under the squeeze. So when it comes to investing, I hope I've been able to convince you of a couple of things. Number one is the world may be falling apart, as inverted commas, but Australia is firmly locked into the fast zone. We do have a two-speed economy, and you can capitalise on that and capitalise on the phenomenal growth that is gripping us right now as we speak. I also hope that you've caught on that there's so much more to being successful as a property investor than just buying a property and going to a bank. There are a whole lot of little 1%ers that can make a huge difference, and there are all sorts of strategies that you can employ. We have some proprietary software that we've developed in-house. We call it your Property Strategy Blueprint, and our property mentors are happy to do a meeting like this with you, but it'd be one where you're not muted and you're talking back and forward and you're engaged and involved. It's private, it's just you, it's your figures. And you would be amazed just how much we can reveal about your own situation, the reality of otherwise of the goals that you hope to achieve, and exactly what steps you need to take to make them a reality. If you would like to take us up on an offer for a no-obligation consultation with a property mentor who is an investor, not a salesman or salesperson, then you can make a note of that on the feedback form that you can complete just in about a minute's time. Research is important, not just the research of the property, but research of your own situation. We're here for the long haul. We've been here for nearly 10 years now, and I always had a long-term vision, helping people not buy one property, but achieve financial independence over time through multiple properties, tell their family and friends about us, and that means that every transaction we need to treat with the utmost respect and care, and that's what we strive to do. I'm really, really proud of the team of people I've got here. I said they're not salespeople. They're investors. They know what they're talking about. They really, really do know their stuff. Heather is just the best in finance, and my property mentors are all highly skilled. And if you ask them something that they don't know the answer to or can't get their hands on the answer pretty quickly, it's probably not worth knowing. I might sound like I'm bragging, and I suppose I am a little bit, because I really am so proud of the team that I've got. If you've never engaged with them or with us one-on-one, I throw out a challenge to test us and see if I'm all talk or if it's real. I'm more than happy for you to talk with existing clients, whether you need to talk to 1, 5, 10 or 20 that have been exactly where you are, have taken the plunge and have engaged with MRD in the past. And I would hope that at some future time you would have no hesitation in letting me put you down as a referral or a referee for someone, maybe who's thinking about doing business with MRD in a couple of years' time, and they could talk to you and talk about your experience. So thank you for listening. If you complete the My Starting Point form, that would be step 1, in my opinion, and step 2 would be to take me up on the offer for a strategy blueprint consultation, which we can do one-on-one if we're geographically in the same place, or, as I said, we can just do it as a web meeting. You sit at home, you can be in your jammies if you want, you have a glass of wine or a cup of coffee, and it's good. You can talk, you ask questions, and it's very much you driving it, not us. You're giving us the input, you're giving us the variables and so forth. So it will be very much tailored by you for you. So there's the two links. You can also see them in the side panel. So if you check out that side panel, you can click on those links directly and it'll take you to the webinar feedback where you can tell us whether you want to engage and look at what the next steps are possible for you, whether you just have some questions and you want to talk and maybe have a strategy blueprint with no commitment, or whether you say, look, timing isn't right for me now, talk to me in 6 months' time when we come off parental leave, or whatever the case may be, or perhaps you're just not interested, and that's fine too. If you tell us where you're at, we can respect you accordingly. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you got a lot out of it. I know there was a lot of information to absorb, but I just think if you can get your head around what's really going on and challenge some thinking, then the world is your oyster, as they say, and opportunity abounds. Have a wonderful, wonderful Christmas break. If I'm not talking to you beforehand, if I am, you can still have a wonderful Christmas break. And I look forward to catching up with you when I travel in the new year. Perhaps if you're visiting us for a holiday at any stage, let us know, and we'll love to catch up with you. And of course, we're always available by phone, email, and webinar. Good night, and thank you for listening. Oh, before I go, there is the side panel there where you've been able to type questions as you go. You can keep typing your questions. I believe I've got staff on standby who are answering them. And if I could find my side panel, which disappeared before, let me just grab it. There we go. Okay. For those of you that want to hang around, I'm happy to have a look at those questions and answer those that are relevant as a group. So if you've got a question, feel free to start typing away. Oh, hello, Malcolm. You've been talking to me. I've had my little thingy bob here minimized while I was doing the meeting. You're asking about the Perth market. I personally think that the next markets to move are Brisbane and Perth after Brisbane. I think Perth is nudging along the bottom. I think Brisbane will probably move a little bit sooner, but I see a lot of reason for optimism in the Perth market. I think Melbourne has peaked. I think it's pretty obvious Melbourne has peaked and it's come off the boil. Sydney I don't think has peaked yet, but it's certainly on the way up. I tend to look at the bigger capitals where there is growing population. And when I say bigger capitals, I look at southeast Queensland, which takes in not just Brisbane, but you've got Ipswich, you've got the northern and the Sunshine Coast to a lesser degree, and the Gold Coast, fast becoming like a super city. I think Brisbane is ahead of the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coasts. I think the ripple effect will come out from it. But having said that, the announcement of the Commonwealth Games is going to do massive, massive wonders for Brisbane and the Gold Coast, because, I mean, there's a lot of investment dollars that are about to start being unrolled into the Gold Coast now. And Brisbane being the gateway and the capital, that'll have huge spin-off there. So there are some good things happening in different markets. Are there NRAS properties available in Toowoomba? What sort of LVR is available for NRES properties purchased in S? With Shane, with regards to LVR, self-managed super, that's a little bit of a variable there, and I would prefer if you could maybe drop that question onto the My Starting Point form for Heather, because it does vary. The rules are actually quite different from lender to lender, and there are things that will affect from one borrower to another borrower. Without giving too long an answer, you want to be very, very careful buying NRES property in a boom town or a muscle town. Very careful. Because you're going to be giving away 20% of the rent. Now, whether you buy an expensive property with a really high rent or an inexpensive property with a low rent, you get the same 10 grand thereabouts from the federal government, but you have to give 20% away in order to qualify. Now, sure, you could jump out of the NRES scheme, but that would be sort of a bit of a waste. So NRES works best. Like, I've heard of people, somebody was talking about, I think Doug was saying that somebody saw NRES properties being advertised in Kalgoorlie or somewhere. I mean, what on earth would you do that for? Because by the time you calculate the 20% reduction in rent, it would be more than the government grant. So you'd be going backwards. It's just ridiculous. It's like the person Doug was speaking to recently who was investing into, he was salary sacrificing into superannuation, because when you salary sacrifice, you only pay 15% tax on the way into super. So instead of being taxed in your pay packet at the top marginal rate, you're taxed instead into super at 15%. So it can be a strategy that works for people. This particular gentleman was doing it on the advice of his accountant. The only problem was he had 4 or 5 investment properties and his personal tax was 0. So he was forfeiting, taking that money at the 0 tax rate and putting it into super and paying 15% for the privilege of having it in super and not able to get his hands onto it. Your hair would curl if you saw some of the things that we saw. Some of the finance structures and situations that people get themselves into from so-called experts. More questions? Good question, Cameron. What would you say to people that say property is a horrible investment and that the property market is dead and will collapse shortly? I would probably say, why? Explain. And most of them will simply say because of the woes. What happened in Japan and America, it's going to happen here, and I've covered that extensively tonight. I wouldn't probably try to convince them if they were telling me that that's what was going to happen and wanted to sort of dig their heels in and argue with me. I'd rather watch paint dry than argue with someone. But if someone was genuinely torn and just said, look, I'm confused, I'm getting mixed messages, I would probably suggest they listen to a recording of this webinar and see if it makes a difference. There's a lot of people building in Gladstone. When do you think the market there will peak? I hear about the population growth, but do you think there will be a time when housing will be oversupplied? Thanks, Amber. I appreciate that question. It's a good one. I don't see that becoming a problem for quite a while because of, it's like I showed you that graph before, how the market booms and takes off, and then it sort of plateaus, and then it booms and takes off. The problem with that graph, if you like, is that in the context of Gladstone, we've sort of grown and peaked, but it's like we've got this whole new wave of industry and development, and the whole Queensland coal seam gas industry has just disrupted everything, and it's changed the rules that I would normally go by. So that is a concern to me, that people can become over-enthused by a single industry, whether it be mining or anything, and just so dependent on one industry. If something were to happen, like, you just take the worst possible scenario, what happened in Japan with the tsunami. Imagine if you bought investment property in Japan in a town that was supported by nuclear energy, and the town was going gangbusters, and suddenly nuclear power became on the nose, and they didn't want it. I mean, the domino effect is quite significant, and that's why some people stay away from anything other than a place like Brisbane, and say, well, we'd prefer to maybe get less rental yield but reap the spin-off from the ripple effect in Brisbane, and not take such high returns, but really hedge our bets, so to speak, and take a more conservative, long-term, safe strategy. But having said that, I don't see much of a threat. I do see it more to the boom towns, the little towns that will be around the Surat Basin, but not so much those three that I mentioned. I think that they will be pretty good for quite a while to come. In fact, a very long time. Something else I was going to say then. I can't remember whether I mentioned it earlier on this webinar or on my former one, but I'm syndicating a deal in Brisbane at the moment. I might just bring it up if I've got it here, ever so briefly, and show people. Oh, here it is, sorry. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but this is a really, really good deal where I've managed to get the developer to hold prices. I've said, if you want pre-sales, you're going to have to sell them, or be prepared to let me sell them at the same price you sold stage 1 for in 2009. Well, he's moved the price by 5,000. But between when these settle and when the first ones came on the market, well, 3 years will have elapsed. These won't be finished for about a year. There's 3-bed townhouses and 2-bed apartments. Now, if anyone has heard of IKEA or Costco from America, or Masters, which is the Woolworths equivalent of Bunnings that have moved into the country, bigger and better and going to make Bunnings look smaller, this particular estate won the Best Master Plan Community Award for 2011. Okay, I have my screen paused. Thanks. Sorry, I had my screen paused. Yeah, this community has won all sorts of awards. My brother-in-law has 3 houses there. We've been watching it for a while. It's really reached critical mass. And when you see the names of some of those companies that are going in there, 330 million in new development. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but for a whole bunch of reasons, which I'm happy to talk to people about if they want to individually, I am so excited about this area and this particular development. It's like a perfect storm, because this developer wants his pre-sales. And so he's asked me for 8 to 10 pre-sales, and I can get a really good deal on those. Now, what I've already negotiated is a really good price, $320,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment and $355,000 for a 3-bedroom townhouse. But what I'm planning to do is syndicate 10 people. I'm talking about not people who are curious, but I'm talking about fair income. Finances are okay. They're ready to go ahead. They're ready to put in a letter of intent. Then I'm going to call him into my office. and I'm going to say, here you go, here are the 10 pre-sales you wanted, but in return this is what we want. Body corporate paid, sorry, stamp duty paid complete, which is about 10 grand. Body corporate paid for a year, it's about another 2,100. Guarantee the rents for a full 2 years from the day of settlement at 0.5% better than the market, which is 5.7% yield. And if people do this side of the 31st of January, which should be a cakewalk, they'll get the 10 grand from the Queensland government as well. And it's in a brilliant area, like for so many reasons, but my brain's getting a bit foggy now. So if anyone's interested in those, just let us know. I mean, I did send an email in the middle of last week, and the response has been overwhelming, but if you missed that, you can ask for it. As a 17-year-old, what advice would you give me to get me started in getting property? I'd tell you to get your old man to get his act together and then leverage off his equity. Sorry, Malcolm. No, look, seriously, to qualify for a property, there are two things that you need. You need cash flow and equity. So you need to be working and you need to be able to show an income. And secondly, you need a deposit or equity. It doesn't have to be your own. I have 3 extra properties today as a result of my brother. He put up equity in a home in Sydney to allow Katrina and me to buy a property back in 2003, I think it was. That we couldn't afford because our equity was all used up. We had the income to show, but not the equity. He kindly let me use his equity, and I bought more than 3 since then, but 3 directly as a result of him, because the growth that I got out of that property, I was able to have his property released as security within 18 months because I bought in a market that was growing. And so I got my property revalued. It stood on its own 2 feet, so I no longer needed any security from him. And I've since used that and leveraged twice more. So when you think, you know, another doubling cycle, there's millions of dollars worth of future wealth for my family in the years to come, just because rather than taking a no from the bank, I was able to think outside the square. But you do need someone to put up their equity, and it's probably best to ask and check with them first. Wayne, you said interested, definitely interested. I presume you're referring to this property here on my screen. I'll show you the next page. Those are photographs of completed stage 1. And that's the deal that I'm asking for. Now, that's not an offer he has made. What he has agreed to is the price. As far as the developer is concerned, that price is the deal. He's already bent over backwards. He's already doing a really, really good deal because they are good prices. Everything else on that page we're asking for. I mean, the $10,000 Queensland boost, I'm not asking for that. You just get that. But the rental guarantee, the body corporate, it says $10,000 paid back at settlement there. I've changed my mind on that because that would affect the values. So stamp duty is going to be about 10, a little bit under for the 2-bedroom units and a little bit over for the 3-bedroom townhouses. So I'm going to just ask him to pay stamp duty at settlement so that it doesn't impact negatively on valuations. And that rental guarantee, basically a 5.7% return. So anyway, Wayne, if you put your email address into the chat screen there, all the files and documents for this particular property are stored on the internet in a program called box.net. I will merely add you and you have instant access and you can download them all. Aren't there still some environmental concerns over coal seam gas? Could that still reduce the growth of Gladstone? Thanks, Amber. That's a great question. Coal seam gas is actually being harvested from the Surat Basin. There's no mining in Gladstone. Gladstone is where they're converting, it's the production of the LNG, the liquefied natural gas, and then it's being shipped off from there. So there isn't actually mining as such in Gladstone. That's one thing that a lot of people misunderstand. Gladstone is the muscle city that supports Queensland's mining industry. Yes, there are environmental concerns over coal seam gas. There's all sorts of political bun fighting going on that at the moment. Chances are there will be some restrictions and some, what's the word I'm looking for, guidelines imposed on mining companies, which I'm all for. Like, let's face it, you don't want people wrecking the environment for the sake of chasing a dollar. But having said that, there is so much coal seam gas which was a waste product. There is so much potential. There is such a need for alternative energy. This is a clean energy source that it is in no one's interest not to harvest it. So what that means is that mining companies will have to adhere to safe practices. There is no way in the world that they're going to stop it. No government at any level has any intention of stopping it. So it is a matter of finding that right balance, and there is so much money to be made that I don't think that any mining companies are going to balk at actually doing it. Sure, if they can get away and be environmentally reckless and vandalistic, you know as well as I do, some companies will, but they won't be allowed to, and they will fall into line because, let's face it, there's dollars to be had. If there are more questions, please send them to me. Of course, you can just send us an email with questions and we can get back to you. And if anybody else would like access to the folder where you can view the site plans, the floor plans, and read more about this particular property syndicate offer that I'm taking, you can email us or even put into this chat screen here your email address, and I'll ensure before I go home tonight that you get access to, it's like Dropbox, but it's called box.net. And a little bit of trivia, you get 5 gigs for free when you register, which means you've got 5 gigs of storage up in the cloud that you can store whatever, and you can have family photos there and give access to certain folders to certain family members. And they can look at it just like they would on your Facebook site. But if you've got an iPhone or an iPad and you download their app, they will upgrade you and give you 50 gigs of storage for free for life. The only catch is they want you to do it before the 2nd of December. And where they make their money is because this particular software, it's designed to make you move away from having a hard drive and store everything in the cloud, where you have access from anywhere in the world to all your files, and you can grant access to who you want when you want. And the more you get hooked and use this stuff, the more you'll want all the other features and benefits, and you'll end up paying them $15 a month. I think that's what it costs to upgrade and get all of the functionality and the features. But in the meantime, it's a really good place to back up your hard drive and keep all your files safe. So it's called box.net. You can join that for free. All right, guys. Well, it's been wonderful sharing with you. I hope you got a lot out of it. And yeah, I look forward to catching up with you. Malcolm, I'm looking forward to getting all that stuff from you. I chased Heather up recently, and she was just waiting for a couple of bits and pieces, I think, so she could weave her magic. Maybe that's changed in the last couple of days, I don't know. But I haven't forgotten about you and the things that we said we'll do. All right, guys. Well, good night. And we'll chat to you soon.